In 1979, a beloved black pastor from the mountain hamlet of Ridgeview, Georgia, disappeared without a trace, leaving the faithful with nothing but rumors and heart-wrenching questions. 30 years later, a chance discovery in the Chattahoochee National Forest would set in motion a series of events no one could have foreseen. Caleb Turner, 43 now, woke before dawn that Friday in his modest apartment on the outskirts of Gainesville, Georgia. An early riser out of habit more than choice, he shuffled into the living room, flicked on the television, and absently cycled through public access channels. Static, farm reports, and low-budget infomercials blurred past until a local religious broadcast caught his eye. A silver-haired preacher paced an oak pulpit, thunder in his voice, sunlight pouring through jewel-toned windows behind him. The cadence, the conviction. It all yanked Caleb backward through time to memories he'd fought hard to bury. His father, Reverend Isaiah Turner, had once filled a sanctuary with that same fire. Ridgeview's Pleasant Grove Baptist had been his life's work until the night he vanished in December 1979, leaving his wife and their adolescent son to navigate a tidal wave of grief and suspicion. Police scoured the mountain roads for weeks. Parishioners murmured about racially motivated violence, and tabloid journalists floated everything from secret affairs to cult involvement. None of it stuck. Eventually the search dwindled. The tips went stale, and Caleb, then only 13, watched hope die one frozen evening at the edge of the woods. The memory tightened across his chest like cold wire. He jabbed the remote off just as the phone rang. "Mr. Turner?" The voice on the line was clear, practiced, and female. "This is Detective Olivia Grant with the Hall County Sheriff's Office. I need you to stay on the line. We believe we've uncovered evidence related to your father's disappearance." Caleb gripped the handset. "That case is 3 decades old, Detective. You sure you're not working a prank?" "No prank," she said evenly. Early this morning, a logging crew clearing wind-felled pines near Cooper's Ridge uncovered a vintage Puma duffel. Inside were a pastoral robe and a King James Bible bearing your father's name. The site's been secured, but we'd like you to verify the items. Officers are en route to pick you up. Can you be ready in 15 minutes? 15 minutes. 30 years. Caleb forced air into his lungs. "I'll be outside." He hung up, pulled on jeans and a denim jacket, then paused in front of the dark television. He'd avoided sanctuary pews and Sunday sermons for decades, convinced God had answered his father's devotion with silence. Now that same silence felt alive, charged, waiting. Headlights washed across the living room curtains. Caleb pocketed his phone, locked the door, and climbed into the back of a waiting cruiser. The ride northeast toward Cooper's Ridge cut through rolling farmland still soldered in pre-dawn mist. Conversation was minimal. Caleb watched treetops blur into a solid wall of green, wondering how something as personal as a Bible could lie hidden so long only to surface on an arbitrary Friday. Within 20 minutes, the cruiser eased onto a rutted forestry road. Yellow crime scene tape glowed beneath generator floodlights. Men in hard hats and sheriff's deputies milled around a 10-foot white pine stump, its core hollowed and rotten. A heavy-set man in logging chaps, Jack Morrison, according to his name badge, greeted Caleb with a rough handshake. "Morning," Jack said, voice gravelly. "Hell of a thing to find before breakfast." Detective Grant joined them. Mid-40s, athletic build, sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. She guided Caleb beneath the tape toward an evidence table inside a pop-up tent. Gloves snapped as a deputy unzipped the weather-cracked Puma bag. First he lifted the robe. Cream linen edged with delicate lilac piping, soil stained but intact. Then the Bible, cracked leather, frayed ribbon bookmark, Isaiah T. Turner inked in looping cursive on the flyleaf. Caleb's knees nearly gave. "That's his handwriting," he forced out. The room swam. He steadied himself on the metal table edge and blinked until the black spots faded. Detective Grant lowered her voice. "We'll run touch DNA swabs on the collar and binding. Our local lab's limited, so I'll expedite transport to the state GBI office in Atlanta. But your visual confirmation already ties these artifacts to Reverend Turner." A deputy slipped a small envelope from the Bible's back flap. Inside was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper, water-stained yet readable. Caleb recognized his father's angular script. Lord, grant me endurance. Darkness tests the shepherd, yet truth must prevail over wolves in the fold. Wolves in the fold. Caleb swallowed hard. My father was meticulous. He never used poetic warnings unless something weighed heavy. Jack Morrison, leaning on his shovel, cleared his throat. Found the bag under that stump. Whoever buried it dug down through the rotten core first, then packed dirt around it. Tree rings put felling around 1985, maybe later, so the bag could have been buried years after your dad disappeared. Detective Grant nodded. We have a lot of timelines to untangle, but you give us one piece we can't fabricate: context. Anything you tell me about enemies, disagreements, tensions at Pleasant Grove will help. Caleb hesitated, eyes drifting to the robe. Ridgeview was rural and segregated in spirit even after the laws changed. Dad took stands that made white business owners furious, integrating Sunday school picnic grounds, hosting voter registration drives. But inside the church, I always thought his battles were spiritual, not political. Grant made a note. We'll revisit that. Right now, my team needs to catalog the area before tonight's rain. You're free to go home, but I'd like photographs, Caleb interrupted. Everything, top to bottom. You'll get a full evidence packet, she assured him. That's protocol. The cruiser returned Caleb to his apartment complex just after 8. Instead of creeping back to bed, he unlocked a spare room he rarely entered, a miniature shrine to his father's scholarship. Shelves bowed under hymnals, exegesis commentaries, and 20-plus years of sermon notebooks each, spine labeled in black fountain pen ink. Caleb traced them with a fingernail: 1973, 1974, 1975, until the row stopped abruptly at 1978. The 1979 volume was missing. He pulled the last notebook off the shelf, flipped pages at random. Neat outlines, scripture references, margin doodles he remembered copying as a boy, but nothing from the final year. He checked a cardboard box of loose papers, then cracked open a cedar chest at the foot of the bed, his mother's keepsakes, but still numbered 1979 sermons or the personal diary his father wrote nightly. They had vanished just like the man himself. An icy intuition prickled behind Caleb's eyes. If those volumes weren't at home, perhaps they'd remained at Pleasant Grove Baptist after all. He stuffed the 1978 notebook into a messenger bag, grabbed his car keys and headed out. Pleasant Grove sat 10 miles north on a hillside that overlooked Ridgeview's one stoplight downtown. Caleb hadn't stepped inside for 3 decades. Even from the parking lot, he could smell varnished pine pews and lemon oil. Heart hammering, he pushed through the heavy double doors into a bubble of hush broken only by the tick of an old wall clock. Near the chancel rail stood 2 elderly men in charcoal suits, deep in conversation. One, tall with a trim white beard, noticed Caleb first and offered a polite smile. "Morning, friend. I'm Pastor William Carter. Can we help you?" Caleb managed a nod. "You probably knew my father, Reverend Isaiah Turner." Pastor Carter's eyes widened, then softened with recognition. "Caleb? Good heavens, you were just a teenager. Brother Daniel, look who's walked in." A shorter man with round spectacles, Reverend Daniel Brooks, turned and gripped Caleb's hand warmly. They asked after his life, his work as a freelance auto mechanic, and finally what brought him back. Caleb relayed the morning discovery: the Puma bag, the robe, the Bible. Both pastors exchanged uneasy glances. "We always prayed for closure," Reverend Brooks murmured. "Your father was a righteous man. None of us believed he'd abandon his flock." "Detective Grant wants background," Caleb said. "Enemies, tensions. Either of you recall unusual disputes?" Pastor Carter folded his arms, brow furrowed. "Isaiah spent late nights here in '79. Said he was wrestling with a moral dilemma. He'd lock himself in the office, praying loud enough to carry through the vents. When we offered help, he waved us off, said he needed clarity from God first." Caleb hesitated, then unclipped the 1978 notebook from his bag. Dad labeled every sermon by year. I noticed the 1979 volume and his diary are missing. Any chance he stored them at the church? Reverend Brooks guided Caleb to the administrative wing where Isaiah's old office remained largely intact, though the nameplate now read Reverend D. Brooks. Wooden cabinets creaked open, drawers slid, dust motes swirled, but number 1979 books surfaced. They checked the small library next door. Shelves stacked floor to ceiling, cobwebbed corners, card catalog drawers half open, but found nothing. After an hour, Caleb thanked them for their time and prepared to leave, setting his 1978 notebook on a reading table while he helped reshelve a few displaced hymnals. Before exiting, Caleb paused in a rear pew and bowed his head. Prayer felt rusty on his tongue, but words came anyway. If you're listening, if you ever were, lead me to the truth. That's all I ask. Outside the sanctuary door, morning had ripened into late summer heat. Caleb slid behind the wheel and glanced at the passenger seat. Empty. He'd left the 1978 notebook on the library table. Exhaling a curse, he decided to retrieve it later. Fatigue crept into his bones. He drove the familiar road toward his mother's gravesite at Meadowlark Cemetery. She had died the year before Isaiah vanished, and Caleb visited only on anniversaries, but a pull inside said today. He stopped at a roadside florist, purchased a spray of white azaleas, and trekked the winding footpath to her marker beneath a towering sweet gum tree. "Hi, Mom," he whispered, arranging the flowers. "Guess what? They found Dad's Bible." Wind rustled oak leaves overhead, punctuating his monologue of updates. The police call, the pastor's vague memories, his missing notebook. Words spilled freely until a faint whimper interrupted. Caleb rose and traced the sound to another row of headstones. A boy, no older than 10, sat against a rough-hewn granite slab, knees drawn to his chest, tears scoring dusty cheeks. Caleb crouched a few feet away. "Hey, buddy, you lost." The child flinched but didn't run. "My name's Ethan." His voice cracked. "I came with my aunt and uncle, but they left me here 'cause I was crying too much." Caleb's stomach twisted. "Ethan, where's home?" "South Hall." The boy sniffed, rubbing his arms. Caleb touched the back of his hand to the boy's forehead, fiery. "Fever. You're burning up," Caleb said gently. "We need to get you to a doctor." "Please, not home," Ethan pleaded. "They don't like hospitals. Can you take me to a church?" He pointed at Pleasant Grove's steeple visible in the distance. "Mom used to get special bread and grape juice when I was sick. Said it helped heal." Caleb froze. "Take home communion." His father had offered it to bedridden congregants. The gesture felt like an echo from the past, and despite his own crisis of faith, Caleb heard himself promise, "All right, hospital first, then I'll bring communion. Deal?" Ethan nodded weakly. Caleb hustled him to the car, dialed 911, and sped toward Northeast Georgia Medical Center. Paramedics whisked Ethan into triage, leaving Caleb to fill out forms as Good Samaritan. When a nurse asked for contact details, he realized he didn't know the boy's last name. They'd match medical records later. Outside, afternoon clouds thickened, threatening rain. Caleb stepped under the portico, pulled out his phone, and searched for Pleasant Grove's number. No answer. He pocketed the device, intending to return to the church for communion and his forgotten notebook. He had no idea how profoundly both errands would upend everything he thought he knew. Nor did he notice the time. 3:07 p.m., almost exactly 30 years to the minute since Reverend Isaiah Turner had walked out of Pleasant Grove and vanished into history. Caleb opened the car door, unaware that part 2 of his father's unfinished story was already unfolding, breathless, just beyond the storm-dark line of pines. Caleb left the hospital parking lot with Ethan's feverish gratitude still echoing in his ears. The sky above Gainesville had thickened into bruised purple clouds, and a damp wind rattled pecan leaves across the asphalt. He pressed the accelerator, rolling south toward Ridgeview, mind whirring. Somewhere between the discovery of his father's Bible and the frightened boy's plea for communion, the past had clawed its way into the present, and it refused to loosen its grip. He dialed Detective Grant en route, updating her on Ethan, on the missing notebook, and on his plan to swing back by Pleasant Grove. She listened, made rapid clacking notes, and cautioned him again. "You're part of this case now, Mr. Turner, but stay an observer, not a lone ranger. If anything feels off, call me before you do something risky." Caleb promised he would. He hung up, but the promise felt as fragile as the vintage pages tucked in his memory. He turned onto the narrow county road that snaked up Beecher Hill toward the church. The first fat raindrops splattered the windshield. Inside Pleasant Grove, the sanctuary was empty except for Lucas Perry, a lanky 20-something janitor and seminary intern who doubled as whatever the church needed on any given day. He wore earbuds and was vacuuming the burgundy carpet in wide, disciplined rows. Caleb startled him by tapping his shoulder. "Sorry," Caleb said over the whirring vacuum. "I was here earlier with Pastors Carter and Brooks. Left one of my father's notebooks in the library." Lucas shut off the machine. "Oh, sure. They stepped out about an hour ago to the church cemetery, I heard. But I can help you find your book." He guided Caleb through a side corridor to the library, a room that smelled of waxed oak and old hymnals. The notebook lay precisely where Caleb had forgotten it, next to the big oak reading table. He exhaled relief and slipped it into his messenger bag. Before they could leave, a stray book on the highest shelf caught Caleb's eye. Where every volume sat flush against its neighbor, this one jutted forward, its spine half exposed. Something about the disturbed symmetry tugged at him. "Let me push that back before it falls," he said. "I can get it later," Lucas offered, but Caleb was already reaching up. At 6'2", he needed only the tips of his fingers. The moment he tugged, the heavy volume slipped, thudded onto the table, and fanned open, dust plumed. It was titled Stewardship and Church Integrity, a financial guide for congregations. What sent Caleb's pulse spiking were the margin notes, crisp, cursive, unmistakably his father's. Scripture references cross-linked to paragraphs on accountability. Bold underlines warning against the sin of secret theft. But more chilling were faint impressions of erased pencil marks, light but legible when he angled the page beneath the overhead fluorescence. William Carter, Daniel Brooks? Both names had question marks scrawled beside them, then rubbed nearly, but not entirely, away. Blood roared in Caleb's ears. Isaiah Turner had suspected the two current senior ministers of wrongdoing 3 decades ago, the very men now shepherding Pleasant Grove. "Is this book available for checkout?" Caleb's voice sounded distant even to himself. Lucas shrugged. "We still use the old analog logbook. If you sign it, we're good." Caleb scrawled his name, date, and contact on the yellowed ledger sheet, slipped the financial guide beneath his jacket, and thanked Lucas. Before leaving, he asked about take-home communion. "The sacristy keeps pre-sealed kits," Lucas said. "I'll grab one." He returned a minute later with a small velvet pouch. Inside were 2 miniature plastic cups of grape juice and a wafer sealed in foil. Caleb accepted it gratefully, then paused. "Quick question," he said. "Do Pastor Carter or Reverend Brooks usually perform graveside blessings this late in the afternoon?" Lucas looked puzzled. "Sometimes Reverend Brooks goes out to tidy family plots. But a formal blessing? Not that I know of." Caleb's unease hardened. Minutes later, he stepped back into the rain, which now fell in steady, whispering sheets. He slipped the velvet pouch and both notebooks into his bag, zipped it up, and started toward his sedan. But instead of driving off, he veered left, following the gravel footpath that curved behind the education wing toward the church cemetery. Pleasant Grove Cemetery was modest, only 50 yards deep, but its hillside position gave it a haunting panorama of the valley. Moss-flecked stones leaned at odd angles. Wrought iron fences corralled family plots. Plastic flowers faded under weather and time. At the far edge, Caleb spotted movement. 2 figures under black umbrellas, one tall, one stocky. Reverend Daniel Brooks wielded a long-handled shovel. Pastor William Carter held a dark canvas bag. Caleb made sure his shoes scuffed loudly against wet gravel. "Good evening, pastors." Both men jerked around. Reverend Brooks's face went ashen. Pastor Carter's umbrella wobbled. "Caleb, Didn't expect you back so soon, Carter said, forcing a smile. Lucas could have returned your notebook. I was nearby, Caleb replied, stopping 10 paces away. Rain drummed on his jacket hood. Thought I'd thank you again. And maybe ask what brings you out here after hours? Brooks cleared his throat. A parishioner's dog is buried here. He pointed with the shovel at a fresh mound near the perimeter fence. The family wants to relocate it to their farm. We're just helping. Caleb's gaze flicked from the shovel to the canvas bag. His mind replayed the erased names and question marks. Grant's warning rang in his ears, and yet curiosity, anger, and adrenaline crowded out caution. Kind of you, he said evenly. Mind if I watch? My father always taught me it's a noble act to honor even a pet's remains. Pastor Carter's jaw twitched. Weather's turning nasty. Probably best you head home. Caleb noted how Carter's grip tightened on the bag strap. He recognized the ancient emotion sparking behind the pastor's eyes. Fear thinly iced with authority. Actually, Caleb said, I'm headed to the hospital. Little boy needs communion. He lifted the velvet pouch. But since you're here, maybe one of you could bless it? The child would appreciate a pastor's prayer. Brooks glanced at Carter. Something unspoken passed between them. Then Brooks stepped forward, shovel still in hand, and offered a stony half-smile. Of course. They sheltered under a cedar tree whose branches muted the rainfall. Brooks closed his eyes, murmured a perfunctory blessing over the pouch. His voice trembled on the amen. Thank you, Caleb said, and thank you for your integrity all these years. He laid gentle emphasis on integrity, then turned back toward the church. His pulse hammered. Lightning flashed to the south. Thunder followed. Halfway up the slope, he dialed Detective Grant. She picked up on the first ring. Detective, it's Caleb. I'm at the church cemetery. Carter and Brooks are digging. They claim it's a dog's grave, but I think they're moving evidence. Grant's tone shifted from laid back to razor sharp. Stay where you are. We're 15 minutes out, lights and sirens. Do not confront them. Caleb looked back. The pastors had resumed their hurried labor. Brooks stabbed the spade into wet earth. Carter knelt, shoving the canvas bag toward the open pit. Rain washed soil down the mound in rivulets. I'll hang back, Caleb lied. He ended the call and slipped behind a stone angel monument for cover. Raindrops beaded on his eyelashes. His breath puffed white. He watched the older men wrestle something dense and heavy from the hole. Something wrapped in plastic sheeting and twine, no larger than a carry-on suitcase but oddly rigid. Caleb's throat dried. Bone fragments? Books? Both? Suddenly Carter's head snapped up. Even from 30 yards, Caleb felt the man's stare. Carter murmured to Brooks, then tucked the plastic-wrapped object under one arm and marched toward the cemetery's maintenance gate that opened onto a dirt lane. Brooks shouldered the shovel and followed. Caleb debated, heart pounding. Then he broke into a sprint across the sodden grass, reaching his car just as the pastor's dark Buick growled to life on the dirt lane below. He slung himself behind the wheel, threw the Toyota into gear, and followed at a discreet distance, headlights off, wipers squeaking. The Buick fishtailed on the slick gravel, then nosed onto State Route 129 heading north, toward Cooper's Ridge and the National Forest beyond. Caleb's phone buzzed. Detective Grant again. Where are you now? Following them north on 129 past mile marker 17. He answered, voice taut. They're carrying something from that grave. Caleb, I told you. I'm not letting them dump whatever it is. Fine. Keep visual contact, no closer than 2 car lengths. My unit's 5 minutes behind you. Lightning spidered across the clouds, illuminating the road like a strobe. The Buick's taillights glowed red through sheets of water. Caleb maintained distance, recalling the hairpin forest roads beyond. If they turned off, he could lose them. They did. At mile 18, the Buick veered right onto Cooper's Spur, a narrow forestry service track closed to public traffic this time of year. A padlocked gate hung open on busted hinges, broken recently, judging by dangling chain links. Caleb eased the Toyota across the threshold. Mud sprayed, branches clawed at the fenders. The Buick's lights bobbed ahead, weaving through fir trunks. Caleb's dash clock read 6:12 p.m., sunset in 22 minutes, and still no sign of Grant's cruisers. A sudden clearing yawned ahead, a scenic overlook locals called Fletcher's Drop. The Buick skidded to a stop near the rusted guardrail. Carter jumped out, umbrella abandoned, lugging the plastic-wrapped bundle. Brooks followed, shovel in hand. Caleb braked 50 yards back, killed the engine, and stepped into rain that slashed sideways. He flicked his flashlight on, beam low. The clearing plunged toward a sheer cliff, roaring Chattooga River hundreds of feet below. Night birds shrieked in the treetops. Thunder boomed. Carter flinched. He motioned to Brooks, who stabbed the shovel into the earth near the drop-off, prying up a shallow patch of sodden soil. Too shallow, clearly Plan B. Carter set the bundle down, fumbled with the twine, then glanced over his shoulder. His eyes locked onto Caleb's approaching flashlight. "Stay back!" Carter's voice cracked across the wind. Brooks raised the shovel like a pike. Caleb stopped 10 yards away, palms out. "What's in the bag, Pastor?" "This doesn't concern you," Carter rasped. Rain plastered his gray hair to his skull. "Turn around now. You told me you honored my father's legacy." Caleb felt anger rising, flooding his veins. "But you robbed him, didn't you? And when he threatened to expose you, you silenced him." Brooks's face contorted. "He forced our hand. He would have destroyed Pleasant Grove." Lightning flared, and Caleb saw terror, not conviction, in the man's eyes. Carter stooped, tightened the knot, and wrenched the bag off the ground, muscles trembling. "You won't destroy this church the way Isaiah tried," Carter hissed. "No Turner will." He pivoted toward the cliff edge. Caleb lunged. Brooks swung the shovel. Caleb ducked, rain-slick grass nearly tripping him. The blade whistled past his ear. He barreled into Carter, shoulder checking the older man sideways. The plastic-wrapped object slipped, slammed against the guardrail, and burst, the thin sheet ripping to reveal 2 water-damaged books crusted with grave soil. The missing 1979 sermon notebook and Isaiah's diary. A small clay urn smashed on impact, scattering damp ash into puddles. Caleb's stomach heaved. His father's remains. Carter howled, mad animal, and drove a fist into Caleb's ribs. Brooks closed in, shovel raised again. A siren's wail exploded up the track. Red and blue strobes flashed through the trees. Brooks froze, shovel mid-strike. Carter staggered back, realization dawning in his widened eyes. Deputies poured from cruisers, weapons trained. "Drop it! Hands where we can see!" Brooks let the shovel clatter to mud. Carter's shoulders sagged. Caleb stumbled backward, chest burning, rain seeping beneath his collar. Detective Grant sprinted to his side, umbrella useless, fury and relief warring on her face. "I ordered you not to engage," she shouted over the wind, grabbing his arm. But when she saw the smashed urn at their feet, her expression softened. "You just saved critical evidence." Deputies cuffed Carter and Brooks, reading Miranda rights as flashlights danced across the wreckage. Ash mixed with clay shards, 2 mildew-stained volumes of Isaiah Turner's handwriting, and dark clumps of cemetery earth. Grant radioed for forensics, then looked Caleb in the eye. "This ends tonight, Caleb. Your father's story finally gets justice." Caleb stared at the ruined urn, tears blending with rain. He pictured Isaiah Turner's steady hand labeling each sermon, counseling his flock, refusing to bow to corruption, even unto death. Trembling, Caleb pressed a palm against the damp cover of the 1979 notebook. The ink had bled, but the title still showed, "The Courage to Confront the Wolves." He whispered a promise he'd carry into Part 3. "Dad, I'm finishing what you started." Thunder rolled like an amen over the ridge, and the storm began to break, thin streaks of twilight piercing the clouds as deputies led the false shepherds away. Rain still drummed on the station roof when Caleb finished giving his formal statement. But inside the Hall County Sheriff's office a different storm was brewing. One of evidence bags, ringing telephones, and officers pinwheeling between interrogation rooms. The corridors smelled of wet wool and stale coffee, And everywhere Caleb turned, someone was shouting for a file or a forensic tech. Detective Grant shepherded him into a glass-walled conference room away from the chaos. On the table sat 3 plastic tubs. One held the shattered clay urn and damp ash. Another contained the grave-soiled 1979 sermon notebook and Isaiah Turner's diary, each nestled in archival foam. The third bristled with swabs, labeled envelopes, and a sealed paper bag that emitted the faint, metallic tang of freshly unearthed bone. "For chain of custody, we need you to initial every label," Grant said, sliding a clipboard across. Her tone was brisk, but Caleb noticed her hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she pointed to each barcode. "GBI couriers will take these to Atlanta tonight. With luck, we'll have preliminary DNA confirmation within 72 hours. Caleb scrawled his initials again and again, fighting the numb disbelief that threatened to overtake him. Part of him still lingered on Fletcher's drop, tasting rain and adrenaline. Another part already replayed the moment Carter's fist struck and Brooks's shovel whooshed through air. Yet the strongest sensation was quieter, heavier. The sick, sweet realization that the smears of ash on his jeans were, in all probability, his father. Grant finished documenting the time and snapped the final tub shut. "We've booked them," she said, meaning Carter and Brooks. "Charges so far: desecration of human remains, obstruction, attempted evidence destruction. Murders coming once autopsy and confession line up." "Confession?" Caleb's pulse kicked. "Brooks is talking?" Grant nodded. Carter's clammed up, lawyered before his cuffs were tight. But Reverend Brooks cracked after he saw the urn fragments. "He's in interview 2 singing like a church choir. Says your dad confronted them on misused building fund money. $10,000 siphoned to personal accounts." She rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Brooks claims he never wanted Isaiah dead," says Carter, panicked, grabbed a length of pulpit microphone cord, and she let the sentence die, unwilling to speak the word strangled. Caleb sank into a hard plastic chair. "My father kept praying for wolves in the fold," he whispered. "I thought he meant outside the church." Grant eased onto the adjacent chair. Rainwater glistened on her badge chain. "Wolves wear collars too," she said softly. "Listen, you've been running on fumes since dawn. Go home, get dry clothes, maybe some sleep. I'll call when the state lab updates." "I can't leave," Caleb said. "There's a boy in the hospital waiting for communion." He glanced at the velvet pouch in his damp jacket pocket. "And my mother's still buried beside a stranger she married, never knowing the truth about Dad." Grant exhaled. "All right, but first let the EMTs check those ribs Carter bruised." She stood and signaled through the glass for a medic. "After that, I'll drive you to Northeast Georgia myself. You shouldn't be alone tonight." 15 minutes later, Caleb sat in the passenger seat of Grant's department SUV, a compress taped over the blooming bruise beneath his right arm. The wipers cleared neon slices of streetlight from the windshield as they left the sheriff's lot. Grant handled the wheel one-handed, the other punching numbers on her dash-mounted radio, arranging extra patrols for Pleasant Grove. There were still finance records to seize, parishioners to protect, and, she feared, additional secrets to exhume. From her clipped orders, Caleb sensed the stakes had already outgrown 2 rogue pastors. Money rarely traveled in a straight line. Somewhere in the church's dusty ledgers, a paper trail would prove whether the embezzlement was a lone lapse or an institutional rot that reached farther than Ridgeview Hollows. At the hospital, visiting hours had ended, but the security guard waved them through after a whispered explanation from Grant. 7th floor pediatrics hummed with beeping 4 pumps and the low cartoons glow emanating from half-pulled curtains. Ethan lay propped on pillows, skin flushed but eyes brighter. His aunt and uncle, names Caleb now learned were Teresa and Mike Harrell, rose when he entered, clasping his hands in wordless thanks. "I'm sorry I'm late," Caleb told the boy, setting the communion pouch on the rolling tray. "A lot happened tonight. I watched the news," Ethan blurted. "They said police found missing pastor evidence in the mountains." "That's your dad." His eyes were enormous. Caleb nodded. "And we'll talk more soon, but first, let's share what we promised." He opened the foil seal, broke the wafer into 4 pieces, handed cups around. The hospital fluorescence felt too harsh, too clinical for sacred ritual. But as Caleb repeated the words Isaiah had once intoned, "This is my body, given for you," he sensed a fragile calm settle over the room, a sanctuary born of shared breath and intention. Ethan swallowed, then smiled, as if something weighty had unlatched inside his small chest. Teresa Harrell motioned toward the corridor. "Detective said you might need our help," she said, voice low. "Anything we can do?" Caleb hesitated, then realized he did need something painful. "Ethan mentioned your church frowns on hospitals. May I ask, are you members at Pleasant Grove?" Mike grimaced. "Used to be. Carter baptized me when I was 15. We stopped going full-time 5 years back, after some weird stewardship meetings." He exchanged glances with Teresa. "Honestly, money talk felt slippery. We still attend Easter, but we tithe elsewhere." Caleb nodded, new lines forming in the picture. Half-empty pews, diverted tithes, Carter's grasp at influence. Betrayal left fingerprints everywhere. He jotted the Herald's contact info for Grant's files and promised updates. Ethan drifted towards sleep, murmuring a drowsy thank you, Mr. Caleb. Outside the ward, Grant leaned against the wall, scrolling texts. "GBI's en route for a dawn warrant on Carter's personal residence," she reported. Judge signed off easy after hearing Brooks's statement. She paused, studying Caleb's exhausted posture. "I'll have a cruiser drop you home." "I won't sleep," he admitted. "Mind if I sit through Brooks's full confession? Could re-traumatize you. Not knowing would be worse." She studied him another beat, then jerked her chin toward the elevator. "Come on, then. Let's finish the long night." Interview room 2 smelled of old coffee and guilt. Reverend Brooks, now clothed in county-issue scrubs, slouched in a metal chair, wrists cuffed to a ring bolt. His eyes were red raw from weeping, cheeks patchy with stubble where rain had streaked grit. 2 detectives faced him across the table, digital recorder blinking. When Grant entered with Caleb, Brooks flinched as if the young man carried Isaiah's ghost beside him. "I told them everything," Brooks whispered, voice ragged. "But if you want it again, I'll say it." Grant sat. Caleb remained standing, palms on the back of her chair. "Recorder on, timestamp announced." The lead detective, a heavy-set man named Ramirez, asked Brooks to recount December 14th, 1979, the night Isaiah Turner vanished. Brooks's account unfurled in halting fragments. The months-long siphoning of building fund checks into a side account Carter opened under a shell nonprofit. Isaiah's quiet spreadsheet audits. The private meeting he called in the church basement that Friday evening, armed with copies of bank ledgers and a typed ultimatum. Brooks claimed he expected a stern lecture, maybe Isaiah insisting they resign. Carter, older and more fearful, insisted they neutralize Isaiah's leverage first. Intimidate, destroy records, anything. The argument escalated until Carter looped a microphone cord around Isaiah's neck. Brooks sobbed, describing how he froze as Isaiah clawed at the cable, eyes bulging, until his body slackened. "I knelt," Brooks said, tears streaking tracks through grime. "And I heard him say, 'Lord, forgive them. They know not what they do.'" He said it with his last breath. Brooks looked up at Caleb. "Your father prayed for us while we killed him." Caleb's vision swam. Grant touched his arm, "Stay back." He obeyed, nails digging crescents into his palm. Brooks continued. They wrapped Isaiah's torso in an old communion table tapestry, carried him to the shed beside the cemetery, dug beneath a pet's grave marker to mask soil disturbance, and interred him there. They burned the ledgers but panicked about Isaiah's Bible and robe. Memories they feared could link him to the church even if police ruled suicide. 3 weeks later, Carter bribed a drunk logger to dig beneath a rotten stump 10 miles into the forest and bury the Puma bag. Brooks said he wanted to back out, but Carter threatened to expose him if he didn't comply. "What about the notebook and diary?" Grant asked. Brooks wiped his nose on his sleeve. Carter kept them hidden, the diary in his attic, the sermons in a lockbox. He felt safer holding them. Last month, the janitor, found the financial guidebook in the library, handed it to Carter. Carter panicked, realized other evidence might be discovered during the upcoming building renovation. So he dug up Isaiah's remains yesterday evening with plans to dump ashes into the river tonight. Why bring Brooks? Ramirez challenged. He needed someone to dig. Brooks's shoulders sagged. And someone else to damn. Grant switched off the recorder. She turned to Caleb, voice hushed. This is strong, but a jury will want physical forensics. We'll exhume the clandestine grave tomorrow for comparison. Then test DNA from the urn ashes and bones. Caleb met Brooks's gaze. Did my father ever fight back? Curse you? Anything? Brooks shook his head, tears spilling anew. He only repeated that prayer. I've heard it every night for 30 years. Caleb's fists unclenched. Then you know what to do with whatever life you have left, he said, and walked out before anger could tempt him to violence. Dawn light seeped through Caleb's curtains when he finally returned to his apartment. He hadn't slept in 22 hours, yet exhaustion was pinned beneath a scaffolding of grim purpose. On his kitchen table, he spread the 1978 and 1979 notebooks alongside Isaiah's diary, each page photographed by forensics but now entrusted to Caleb for transcription. The diary was fragile, pages puckered and sun-spotted, but several entries remained readable. December 10, 1979. Audit complete. Misappropriation undeniable. William fears scandal will break the flock. Daniel shows remorse. I fear neither understands gravity before God. And 2 days later, evil thrives on silence. Sunday I will speak, but with love, not condemnation. May the Spirit guide their repentance. Beneath the words, a blot of smeared ink suggested Isaiah's pen paused, hesitated, then pressed on. Caleb traced the handwriting, a mirror of his own long loops and angled T's. He imagined his father alone under kerosene lamplight, weighing reputations against righteousness, choosing truth. The ache that bloomed in Caleb's chest felt different from the acidic anger he'd carried half his life. This was grief, pure and unsheathed. He flipped the sermon notebook to Isaiah's final outline, the courage to confront the wolves. The central scripture, Matthew 18 verses 15 to 17, glinted from Lydia blue ink. Isaiah's annotations urged restoration over punishment, confession over exposure, but warned that persistent sin must be named before the gathered body. Caleb read the closing margin note. If they refuse, let the stones cry out. A knock jolted him. He opened the door to find Lucas Perry, the janitor, clutching a plastic storage bin. Detective Grant said you might want these, Lucas said nervously. Old Stewardship Committee tapes. I found them in Pastor Carter's office before police sealed it. Inside the bin lay 10 cassette tapes labeled with dates from 1979. Caleb thanked him and set them beside the diaries. Lucas shifted, eyes rimmed red. I didn't know any of this, he said, voice cracking. I looked up to Pastor Carter. Wolves wear collars, Caleb murmured, echoing Grant. He saw the younger man's devastation, a reflection of his own at 13, and softened. Help us heal this place, Lucas. That can be your ministry. Lucas nodded, wiping his sleeve across his eyes before slipping out. By mid-morning, the story had broken statewide. Georgia pastors arrested in 30-year cold case murder. News vans camped at Pleasant Grove's entrance. Caleb watched aerial footage on his muted TV. Techs in hazmat suits erecting canopy tents over the desecrated grave. Deputies leading church staff to safe zones for interviews. A white coroner's van inching along the gravel lane where Isaiah once guided funeral processions with tender gravity. Detective Grant called at noon. DNA from the robe's sweat collar and the Bible margins matched samples taken from Caleb, paternal confirmation. The ashes yielded a degraded but conclusive male profile tied to both Caleb and Isaiah's cousins. It's him, she said. Your father's coming home. Caleb's throat constricted. Thank you. There's more. Financial Crimes has evidence Carter funneled another 40 grand through shell charities in the late 80s. Brooks claims ignorance may be true, maybe not, but it widens the net. What's next? Arraignment tomorrow. After that, we'll release Isaiah's remains to you for burial. Media circus will be insane. I can assign liaison officers. Caleb glanced at the communion pouch on his counter, now empty but neatly folded. "My father believed in facing wolves with love," he said. "I can face cameras with truth." That evening, Caleb returned to Meadowlark Cemetery carrying 2 bouquets, one for Sarah Turner, the mother whose grief had driven her early to the grave, and one for the patch of earth soon to cradle Isaiah's restored ashes. He knelt between their plots, heart thudding against bruised ribs, and told them everything. About Ethan's fevered plea, about thundering storms and cliff-edge confrontations, about Brooks's confession and Carter's silence. At last he whispered a vow, to honor the legacy of courage and compassion Isaiah had lived, not merely the martyrdom he had suffered. A wind sighed through the sweet gum branches overhead, rustling the flowers like gentle applause. Caleb closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt the ground beneath his knees as steady, not sinking. Tomorrow's headlines would roar, but tonight, just for this hush, he could believe in resurrection. He rose, brushed mud from his jeans, and headed for the parking lot. As he turned, he noticed a slender figure waiting beside his car. Detective Grant, holding 2 styrofoam cups. "Figured you weren't eating," she said, handing him steaming black coffee. "Thought you might like an update off the record." Caleb sipped, grateful for the bitter heat. Grant told him Carter had attempted suicide in his cell, but officers intervened. He was on watch. Brooks, meanwhile, had requested to meet with Caleb, to apologize face to face. Caleb didn't answer immediately. Night settled around them like a velvet curtain. "Maybe after the funeral," he said at last. "I need to bury my father before I can bury my anger." Grant nodded. "The county will cover burial costs." "No," Caleb said. "He was my father. I'll honor him." They stood in companionable silence until car headlights crested the cemetery drive. It was Mike and Teresa Harrell, Ethan asleep in the back seat. They rolled down the window, offering spare casserole and warm hugs. Community was already forming around Truth's scorched clearing, like new grass pushing through ash. In Caleb's chest, something unlatched, a door he'd bolted at 13. Through its widening crack filtered a tentative, frightened, hopeful light. Part 4, he sensed, would not be about exposing wolves. That work was nearly done. The finale must show what came after. Rebuilding trust, claiming justice, and holding space for mercy where wrath once ruled. For Isaiah, for Ethan, for every congregant whose faith had been twisted by the people they trusted most. Caleb climbed into his car, diary and notebook strapped beside him, and drove toward the glow of Ridgeview's single stoplight. Above the pine ridges, the night sky spread clear at last. Rain clouds swept east. Stars burned quiet witness, as they had the night Isaiah Turner disappeared, as they would tomorrow when the past finally lay to rest and a fractured community took its first halting steps into dawn. Sunlight spilled across Ridgeview's courthouse square, gilding the red brick facade and the row of azaleas volunteers had planted the previous spring. The town had never seen so many satellite dishes or out-of-state license plates. Reporters filed live stand-ups beside the Marble War Memorial, their breath visible in the cool March air. Someone sold coffee out of a pickup. Across the street, Pleasant Grove's choir, minus its disgraced leaders, gathered in navy robes, humming Amazing Grace to steady their nerves. Caleb Turner watched it all from the vestibule of the courthouse, hands shoved in his pockets. He had asked for a simple arraignment, but small-town justice rarely stayed small once the decades-old mystery of a murdered black pastor met 21st-century media appetite. On the docket, State of Georgia versus William Harrison Carter and State of Georgia versus Daniel Joseph Brooks. Charges of felony murder, obstruction, desecration, grand larceny, and assorted financial crimes. Carter's attorney, an Atlanta defense shark, had tried to negotiate an emergency transfer to a bigger venue, claiming local bias. Judge Ramirez, resolute and local, denied it. Ridgeview would confront its history in the same building where Isaiah Turner had once sworn in as a county poll watcher. Detective Olivia Grant stepped beside Caleb, crisp in navy blue suit, badge clipped to her belt. "You sure you're ready to see him?" she asked. Caleb nodded, though his stomach tightened. After 30 years of nightmares filled with faceless aggressors, He would finally look into the eyes of the man who had strangled his father and kept the secret while preaching forgiveness from the same pulpit. Part of Caleb feared he might lose control, shout, lunge, something. But every time anger threatened, he heard Isaiah's final prayer, "Father, forgive them," like a steadying hand on his shoulder. A deputy opened the double doors. The crowd hushed as Carter shuffled in shackles, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame. His once patrician face appeared washed out, eyes darting like a trapped fox. When he spotted Caleb, he flinched. Brooks followed, wrists cuffed, head bowed like a man already serving penance. Caleb studied them, two frail old men, not wolves now but broken rams. Oddly, the sight lessened the rage in his chest. Evil, exposed to light, looked so pitiful. Judge Ramirez called the court to order. Formalities passed. Charges read. Pleas entered. Carter, not guilty. Brooks, guilty to all counts. Carter's attorney requested house arrest citing health issues. The judge denied it briskly, citing flight risk and moral hazard. Brooks's attorney petitioned for immediate sentencing to spare the community a prolonged trial. The prosecution agreed to schedule a pre-sentence hearing once forensic audits wrapped. 30 minutes later, the gavel fell and deputies escorted the defendants back to holding cells. Caleb exhaled, knees weak. Grant touched his elbow. First round done. The bigger fight, financial restitution, church records, starts next. Outside, microphones extended toward Caleb. He kept his voice steady, repeating the same line. Truth has its own timetable, but it always arrives. He declined further questions and waded through the cluster to where Ethan and his Aunt Teresa waited. The boy looked healthier, pink-cheeked, eyes bright. You did it, Ethan whispered. Caleb knelt. The law did it, but your courage helped me keep my promise. Ethan's small fingers slipped into Caleb's. Mom used to say a promise is a bridge God walks across. Caleb swallowed hard, nodding. 3 days later, under a cloudless sky, the community gathered on Pleasant Grove's sloping lawn for Reverend Isaiah Turner's second, final funeral. The county donated a polished walnut casket. Local carpenters built a new memorial pulpit in his honor. A florist supplied banks of lilies, each bloom underwritten by anonymous donations that kept arriving until vases overflowed. Caleb had worried attendance might dwindle. Older congregants had died, younger ones scattered. But when he stepped from Grant's cruiser, he saw cars parked all the way to the highway. License plates from 4 states. Black and white, old and young, former members who drifted after whispers of scandal, civil rights activists who'd marched with Isaiah in the 60s, and a phalanx of pastors from neighboring churches determined to help Pleasant Grove rise from ashes. Inside the sanctuary, Isaiah's 1979 sermon notebook lay open on a stand, its water-stained pages framed by archival glass. The title of his final message faced the congregation: The Courage to Confront the Wolves. Caleb placed his hand on the glass before taking his seat beside the casket. Pastor Miriam Gaines, an interim minister called in from Atlanta, officiated. She began with Isaiah's favorite Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation." She spoke of shepherds who protect flocks even when the wolves wear human skin. She acknowledged the wound of betrayal and the heavier weight of forgiveness. At her invitation, Caleb rose, voice rough, and recounted how a feverish boy in a cemetery had redirected his aimless life. He described his father's integrity, the decades-long silence, and the miracle of truth surfacing from a hollow tree stump. When he finished, the choir, led not by professionals but by ordinary members, sang the hymn Isaiah wrote in 1975, "Let justice and mercy walk hand in hand." Notes wobbled, but emotion carried them heavenward. At the graveside, Caleb scattered a handful of earth onto the casket, then pressed the damp soil between his palms. For the first time since he was 13, tears fell without resentment, each drop cleansing. Ethan slipped beside him, placed a tiny wildflower on the mound, and whispered a child's benediction. "Rest now, Pastor Isaiah. We'll take care of your son." The week after the funeral, news coverage shifted to state budget debates and an early spring tornado downstate. Ridgeview exhaled. Pleasant Grove convened emergency congregational. Meetings led by Pastor Gaines and a transitional council that included Caleb, Detective Grant, in civilian capacity, and 5 lay leaders elected from diverse age groups. Topics were daunting. How to account for decades of stolen funds, whether to sell Carter's parsonage to repay tithers, how to prevent centralized financial power from breeding future abuse. Caleb advocated transparent stewardship Saturdays, monthly gatherings where every invoice, payroll stub, and missionary pledge would be projected on a screen for anyone to question. Some murmured that such openness felt worldly, but Gaines reminded them that secrecy had killed their shepherd. The motion passed. Lucas Perry, still processing his shattered mentor image, poured himself into audit work. He and a retired CPA unearthed a tangle of shell charities Carter had used. Money diverted from scholarship funds, even from a widow's roof repair. Each revelation stung, but also galvanized volunteers who donated carpentry, legal advice, and landscaping to restore trust without depleting dwindling coffers. Meanwhile, Caleb returned to his auto repair freelancing by day and spent nights digitizing Isaiah's notebooks and diary for an online archive. He captioned each sermon with historical footnotes, civil rights marches, local factory closures, and posted them free. Within a month, downloads exceeded 3,000. A seminary requested permission to include Isaiah in a course on prophetic preaching. One evening, Caleb and Grant met for coffee at the Ridgeview Diner, neutral territory not stained by memories. Grant updated him. Carter's assets would cover about half the restitution. Brooks, despite cooperating, faced up to 30 years but could receive parole after 15 if health declined. Caleb stirred cream into his mug. "My father would want me to visit Brooks," he admitted. "Not to condone, but to offer the forgiveness he prayed with his last breath." "Think you're ready?" Grant asked. "No," he said honestly. "But readiness isn't the ground forgiveness grows in." April bloomed. On an ordinary Wednesday, Caleb found an envelope in Pleasant Grove's mailbox marked "Return to Sender." Inside lay a letter addressed to Isaiah Turner, dated December 12, 1979, 2 days before the murder. The postmark was local, the handwriting spidery. Sister Loretta Whitfield, a congregant who had died 3 years prior. Caleb unfolded the fragile paper. "Reverend, I hear whispers that you plan to confront leadership about funds. Please be careful. Some men fear truth like others fear the dark. You once said thieves in the temple would expose themselves when light enters. No, you are not alone. My family stands with you." Caleb's throat tightened. He realized that while wolves plotted, saints had prayed. The letter belonged in the archive, a final witness. He photocopied it, then slid the original into Isaiah's diary, which still smelled faintly of forest loam. That night, he drove to the state penitentiary where Brooks awaited transfer to a lower security facility. Visitation glass reflected Caleb's face, thinner, older, but eyes clearer. Brooks shuffled in, dressed in khaki prison garb, clutching a Bible the chaplain had issued. Caleb spoke first. "You said my father forgave you while he was dying. I'm not there yet, but I'm on the road." Brooks's eyes brimmed. "I've confessed to God, the law, and now I confess to you. I let fear make me a murderer. Whatever time I have left, I'll honor Isaiah by telling every inmate I meet how he lived." Caleb nodded. Words felt small, yet something unshackled inside him. As he left, the chaplain pressed a small card into his hand. Brooks's request to be baptized in the name of the God Isaiah served. Caleb whispered a prayer of thanks. Pleasant Grove called a permanent pastor that summer, Reverend Jocelyn Pierce, an energetic woman with a doctorate in theology and a knack for community gardens. Her first sermon cited Isaiah Turner and Uriah in the Old Testament. Blood spilled by unfaithful leaders, yet grace planting new seeds in the soil of betrayal. She invited Caleb to share the pulpit for a reading from Isaiah's lost sermon. "Confront the wolves, but leave room for their redemption." Congregants wept, then applauded, not the performance but the resilience in their own hearts. Ethan joined the youth choir, his voice cracking but fearless. Lucas began seminary coursework online. Detective Grant attended services occasionally, sitting in the back pew to avoid gawkers. Each time, Caleb saved her a seat. One blistering August Sunday, Pastor Pierce surprised Caleb with an announcement. The fellowship hall renovation, funded by recovered money and volunteer labor, would be named the Isaiah and Sarah Turner Center for Justice and Mercy. A mural would depict Isaiah setting a lantern on a hillside, light spilling into dark valleys. Caleb tried to protest. Dad wouldn't want his name on a building, but Pierce smiled. He put his life on the line for integrity. Let the children eat potluck under his name and learn what courage tastes like. Slowly, the building rose. On dedication day, Caleb stood beside the muralist, watching as she painted the final stroke. A small boy's silhouette holding a communion cup, walking toward the lantern. "That's Ethan," she said. Caleb swallowed a lump. Perfect. By fall, Ridgeview felt different. Sure, gossip lingered, but so did new rhythms. Joint worship services with the majority-white First Baptist downtown, financial workshops led by Caleb using Isaiah's notes, and an annual scholarship for social justice ministry funded by donations sent from readers of the online archive. Reporter interest rekindled when Carter, facing irrefutable audits and Brooks's testimony, changed his plea to guilty. He offered a tear-filled statement that some deemed crocodile tears, others first steps toward contrition. Sentencing gave him life, possibility of parole after 25. Brooks received 20, eligible after 10. Neither verdict erased pain but affirmed value. Isaiah's life mattered. Truth mattered. Late November, under a harvest moon, Caleb and Detective Grant hiked to Cooper's Ridge Overlook. The forest was hushed. The stump where the puma bag had hidden now marked by a small stone cairn the Forestry Service approved. A memorial to all truths waiting to be found. Caleb placed Isaiah's favorite compass atop the stones. Grant raised a thermos of cocoa. "To wolves unmasked," she toasted. "And to Bridges," Caleb added, picturing Ethan, Lucas, Pastor Pierce. Moments of connection forged in the crucible of tragedy. They sipped in silence until Grant asked, "What's next for you?" Caleb watched moonlight revering through the pines. "Dad's sermons talk about redeeming time. I spent 30 years angry. Now I want to build." Mechanic turned builder? Maybe, he chuckled softly. Or maybe I'll finish Dad's unfinished manuscript. He always wanted to write a book on honest stewardship. Call it Lantern in the Fold. Could help churches far beyond Ridgeview. Grant smiled. "Count me in for a pre-order." A breeze rustled brown leaves. Caleb closed his eyes and heard, not wind, but words he'd once recited hollowly. "The Lord is my light." They no longer felt hollow. Faith, bruised but breathing, stirred inside him. He thought of Isaiah's final sermon outline, preserved now for generations, and realized the story did not end with wolves exposed, but with sheep learning to guard one another. They turned back toward the trailhead. Stars blazed cold bright overhead. Same stars Isaiah had prayed under the night he penned his ultimatum. But tonight they looked less remote, as if leaning close to witness the work of healing begun. Caleb tightened his jacket, feeling the pulse of new purpose. The road ahead was long: restitution payments, mentorship for Ethan, seminary classes for Lucas, book drafts that would test his discipline. But he welcomed it. Every task was a brick in a bridge his father had begun. A bridge truth would keep walking across long after headlines faded. Behind him, the cairn gleamed pale in moonlight, an altar of rough stone and steadfast memory. Before him, the path wound downward toward Pleasant Grove, where lights glowed warm behind newly replaced stained glass windows. Somewhere inside, a rehearsal piano struck the opening chord of Amazing Grace, its notes drifting into the night like a promise kept. Caleb smiled, whispered a final thank you, Dad, and started down the trail, into the living story of justice and mercy intertwined, carried forward on shoulders willing, at last, to bear their share of light.